Good afternoon. Welcome to Facilitating Perceived Teaching, Social and Cognitive Presence Online by Designing Effective Learning Environments. My name is Peggy Hartwick, and I'm a teacher at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada.
Hi, my name is Julie McCarroll, and I work with Peggy at Carleton, and I'm also a teacher of English as a second language for academic purposes. So our study was conducted in the fall 2020 semester, and during that time, the COVID-19 pandemic had pushed many instructors and many learners into unfamiliar contexts. This unexpected shift was disruptive for both teachers and learners. So forced into this context, we decided that we would shift our regular lesson plans for our post-secondary intermediate level EAP course to a blended online delivery. In doing so, we considered the affordances of digital tools available to us, both through our LMS, which was Moodle, as well as what was able to be connected into Moodle. The original aim of our study was to compare synchronous versus asynchronous course delivery, but due to a lack of asynchronous teacher participation, we had to shift our focus, and we decided to shift that focus to design of our lesson plans. We use the Community of Inquiry framework as an analytical tool at the end of the term. It helped us to reflect on our teaching practices and our course design in relation to the framework, and it helped us to understand what was working, what needed to be changed. And so our research questions became, how do weekly task design and the facilitation of lesson plans, synchronously or asynchronously, impact student and teacher perception of teaching presence, social presence, and cognitive presence? These three presences are part of the Community of Inquiry framework, which I'll explain in a minute. And our second research question was, what are the implications for future design and delivery of blended course delivery in EAP? What is the Community of Inquiry framework? It is a framework that was created by Garrison et al. In 2000, and it asserts that deep and meaningful educational experiences occur when a community of learners who assume both the role of the teacher and the learner are successfully engaged in learning activities. The achievement of this educational experience occurs when the three mutually reinforcing dimensions of the framework converge, according to Vaughan et al. According to Vaughan et al., social presence refers to learning environments that are characterized by trust, open communication, and group cohesion. It is the student's perception of comfort and ease as they interact within a community of learners, according to Anderson et al. Anderson et al. Explain that social presence in digitally mediated contexts lacks the social and nonverbal cues that are typical in face-to-face communication. But it might afford greater opportunity for students to speak up and to participate anonymously, which might be attractive to some students. Garrison says that establishing social presence online, particularly when depending on written rather than spoken communication, it can be challenging, but facilitators must create and sustain this social presence in order to achieve a community of inquiry. He says that they must reflect on the pedagogy of online learning rather than attempting to replicate the face-to-face classroom experience. According to Vaughan et al., students typically interact first socially and then cognitively as they collaborate and construct meaning. Anderson et al., Garrison, and Vaughan et al. See teaching presence as a necessary and unifying presence that is responsible for the design, facilitation, and the direction of social and cognitive processes. It is important to note that both teachers and learners assume the responsibility of teaching presence in a community of learners. And the goal is for learners to gradually assume more of this teaching presence as they develop the ability to construct and reflect on meaning. The design of learning contexts helps to create a comfortable environment where learners are able to engage with ease to facilitate collaboration, critical thinking, and the achievement of outcomes. And I just wanted to emphasize that it is an iterative, flexible, and constantly moving process. Finally, cognitive presence is explained by Garrison et al. As the most basic and the most connected to the learning outcomes of our courses. Garrison argues that cognitive presence is a collaborative process of inquiry, and it's very closely aligned with critical thinking and as well with listening. Learners are expected to develop greater cognitive presence as they become more competent and more confident in their courses. However, Garrison and Cleveland Innes found that strategies that facilitate interaction in online learning environments are insufficient to create cognitive presence. While the quantity of student interaction may be indicative of social presence, it's the quality of interaction that will determine cognitive presence and then subsequently facilitate deep and meaningful learning experiences. As noted earlier, these three presences interact, and when they do, deep and meaningful learning occurs. Yet it's important to remember that the presences ebb and flow. So Akel and Garrison found that social presence is dominant at the beginning of the course. Students are developing relationships, they're negotiating roles, and then cognitive and teaching presences come to dominate as the term progresses and students come to focus more on academics. The presences are also mutually reinforcing. Notebloom and Claywell found that high levels of cognitive presence were reported by students who also had high levels of social and teaching presences. And this was reported in Chu et al. Higher levels of social presence, for instance, seem to facilitate collaboration and construction of meaning in these learning communities. So it is at the intersection of these three presences that deep and meaningful learning experiences occur.
Okay, so we've moved into this unfamiliar territory, all of a sudden forced into teaching online, but how do we know what we're doing is working? And this is what Julie and I sought to find evidence of the three presences from a survey, which I'll explain, and in relation to our lesson plans. Okay, so for participants, it's just a small research project that we had. So we had 3 intermediate level EAP classes. From those 3 classes, we had 27 students participate and the 2 teacher researchers on screen right now. The data collection consisted of a survey. So this was adapted from Arbau et al. In 2008. The survey was designed to measure 13 characteristics of teacher presence, 9 of social presence, and 12 of cognitive. And we did adapt the teacher one to extend to include questions on professional development over the summer between the 2020 winter term and the fall 2020 term. Were there any professional development that the teachers sought out, and how did they perceive that helping them in their lesson planning? The other thing that we did, and this was more of a reflective, is the teacher researchers independently completed itemized tables of the tasks that they used in their course. And we compared our teaching materials in relation to the 3 presences. So we were looking in the materials for evidence of what consisted of perhaps social presence, teaching presence, or cognitive presence. And that was the data analysis procedures. Additionally, there were numeric values assigned to the survey results from strongly disagree 0 to strongly agree 4. And a copy of the survey is available in a paper that Julie and I had published in June, I think, of 2022. So the findings, and we're going to talk first about, so remember we had results from the survey and we also had results from course design. And so Julie and I looked back, remember looking for evidence of COI in our course design reflectively, so at the end of the term. In terms of social presence, so thinking back on the definition of social presence that Julie talked about just earlier, is creating safe environments for students. Students need to feel that they belong, that they have a voice. And upon reflection, we feel that we had a module, an orientation module, we called it module 0, and the students were expected to do this before they actually started to come into class synchronously. And so they had an opportunity to meet us in a safe context. We had a recorded video saying, explaining our roles that we team teach. They also had an opportunity to introduce themselves. So they had a model introductory video that we had created, and then they were asked to create their own introductory video and then reflect or post responses to 2 of their classmates. So this really gave an opportunity for students to have their own voice, but also to say hi to classmates before the term got going. And this is pretty standard in online courses anyways, so we were happy that we had implemented that. So also in terms of social presence, we had ongoing communication channels, and students could post questions to their teacher, they could post questions to their other classmates, they could join synchronous office hours. So there were asynchronous and synchronous opportunities to communicate with their teacher or with each other. And the way I see this is it really emulates a lot of my students in other courses are using Discord, which is a social media platform, to communicate. And so we created these types of platforms for communicating either text, through video, or asynchronous or synchronous. So in terms of teaching presence, something important within the framework, the COI framework, is teaching present is shared. It's not just the teacher, but it's also the learner moving into the role of teacher. So this is something that we'd hope to see throughout the term. So initially, we created teaching presence early in the term through a diagnostic assessment, and then we created individual workshops on H5P. So H5P is a platform that was integrated into the LMS. And the nice thing about these that helped to create this teaching presence were Julie and I were visible in the workshops through recordings. It was interactive in that there were comprehension checks and engaging, we hope. And another example of teaching presence. So again, this is showing more of the shift where the teacher moves, the teaching presence moves to the responsibility of the learner. So initially, Julie and I created the teaching presence in the orientation module, whereby we set up one-on-one meetings with the students. And this shifted later in the term. So you can see in September, the onus was more on me and Julie, to later in November, where the student actually took the role of the teacher. They led the one-on-one session, and it was their responsibility to bring us up to date on where they were at in their research projects. And then more on teaching presence. So in a similar vein, in terms of the student shifting to the role of assuming this teacher presence, is they help to really redesign the course. So midterm, we asked them to respond to a survey. It was anonymous. And based on this survey, we were able to make modifications to our course in terms of the layout, the design, and what would facilitate their learning experience over the rest of the term. And this was important. This was the first term that we were able to prepare to teach online more fully. And then finally, cognitive presence. So we have the 3 presences, cognitive presence. So in our EAP courses, we're very into scaffolding. I'm sure most people here are believe in scaffolding, the importance of scaffolding. And so the screenshot on the left, so the class discussion and group work, just shows where we've highlighted instances of skills that we were really trying to reinforce. So these were the types of activities that we were trying to create and provide for our learners that were then relate to the assessment. And so on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see several steps of a research project that's done in a CU portfolio. So this is a formative assessment, but it's worth a total of 42% of their grade overall. So you really see this connection between the learning outcomes, what we wanted the students to be able to do at the end of the term, related to skills like citing or language like oral presentation, that sort of thing. And so there's this real connection between the type of activity we did in class and what we expected them to do and what we were assessing them on throughout the term. So I'm going to just talk briefly to one slide and then shift it back over to Julie. So again, the purpose of the survey was also to provide evidence. And the COI framework was a great way to do this. So moving into this slide. So this slide, we were looking at the averages. So the survey went out to teachers and students, the averages of teaching social and cognitive presence as reported by, and you can see the difference between students in section A and D and students and teachers in section C. So A, C, and D combined averages of all presences consistently rated their perceived level of teaching presence higher than teacher participants. So this may suggest that students appreciated what we were doing in this online context. However, teacher of section C, you can see there's quite a drop compared to the students. And so upon reflection, she, which was me, was really motivated to continually improve the layout of my LMS in terms of clarity of instruction and ease of access of materials. And I actually continue to focus on this in my non-EAP courses, even back in the classroom. So this feedback from students, so students assuming a teaching role, was really useful and has really helped push my design in terms of LMS platforms.
Okay, in terms of social presence, we can see that across the board, it's pretty similar, right? So as Peggy said earlier, she was the teacher of section C, I was the teacher of sections A and D. But if we look at them overall, they're pretty similar. However, it is a bit lower, right? The teacher, in my case, the teacher is assuming the role, the social presence is being fulfilled more than the students. And so this is suggesting that more emphasis needs to be placed on creating social presence. If you recall what I was speaking about earlier, social presence typically develops early on in the course, and it is also necessary in creating these environments where students feel comfortable to participate in and engage in activities which are part of the cognitive and teaching presences. So, in reflecting back on these results, I've made changes in subsequent iterations of the course. I continue to have the module 0 in terms of the orientation module, having students to prepare an introduction video and comment on the videos of others. I extend that to include comments on more student videos. Another change that I have made is that when we do breakout room activities, I keep students in the same group throughout the semester, thereby giving them an opportunity to create a working relationship rather than changing it up and having randomly assigned groups every time. Finally, I have added a discussion post after classes, after several of the classes, to be completed asynchronously. And similar to the introduction video in the module O, students are responsible to not only post, but also to read the posts of others and to comment on their posts as well. So it's become more in the forefront of my mind to develop opportunities for social presence to develop early on and to continue to develop throughout the term. With respect to cognitive presence, we can see that the students in my two sections, A and D, rated their perceived level of cognitive presence significantly lower than what I rated it to be. Whereas Peggy's section C, herself and the students were a lot more similar. So I was a bit of an outlier here, and I guess I overestimated the level at which students were engaged in the activities that we were creating, and or overestimated the connection that students were making between activities that were being done synchronously and these graded activities, as Peggy explained earlier. So one of the things that I try to do now is really go over the top in explaining the connection between what we are doing in terms of, ungraded practice activities and later graded assignments. I'm demonstrating to students the connections explicitly. I'm showing them in rubrics. I'm reminding them, and it'd be interesting to rerun the survey and see if this has made a difference. I'm hoping it has. And one more thing that I wanted to point out in terms of cognitive presence was we did have these 3 sections of the courses. So if we look at the individual reports from students in section A, section D, and section C, it's interesting to note that section D was taught first in the week, section C was taught second, and section A was taught third. So it seems that with each iteration, the students are reporting higher levels of cognitive presence. And Peggy and I believe that this was due to the collaboration that we had, and that we would have these regular informal meetings. So I would teach section D, give it a go, and then I would have a meeting with her and say, this worked really well, this didn't work so well, this needs more explanation, this maybe needs more time, put less time on this, they got a little bit bored. So it helped to improve her facilitation and design of the course, the lesson plan for that day. And then my own reflection helped me to improve in the second time that I taught it. So it's important to continue to consider these meetings in terms of team teaching, but even if you're teaching by yourself, to really become a reflective practitioner and reflect on what has worked, what hasn't worked, and go forward from there.
Throughout, we've been reflecting on what worked and what didn't. And I think it's important to just sort of, in summary, say the inclusion of asynchronous discussions, opportunity to meet or post reflections or comments after class is helpful, as Julie spoke to earlier, a greater emphasis and time for student interaction. And so this speaks to the ebb and flow between the 3 presences as well. A clear delineation of synchronous versus asynchronous task in terms of the design in the LMS. And so that's what I was speaking to earlier, is really making it easy for students to know where to find things and to understand where instructions are. Julie and I also got into the habit, we didn't talk about this, but of recording instructions, which was really helpful. So not only having print versions, but recorded instructions. And then moving, this was at a departmental level, but we really saw a good uptake, but mandatory use of cameras respectfully, and working microphones for language classes. So this was really useful. They could do in the orientation module, they did a system check. But also this speaks to when Julie talked about having permanent groups, the students really got to know each other as they would in a regular classroom setting in their breakout rooms. And so this just screenshot at the bottom just shows a clear delineation of tasks. This is what we're going to do in their synchronous class. This is how many minutes. procs, asynchronous, and then homework. These are our references. And yes, we will be live for questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.